My name is Rio. I am the Humanities Director here at Hamilton Education. I'm here today to walk you through Test 495. This is an ACT. I'm going to walk through the English questions with you. We'll go through every single English question and not only say why the correct answer is correct, we're going to talk about why the incorrect answers are incorrect and talk about how we can deal with these question types in general, whether on a future test or later in the test, or if we see similar topics on the SAT, because of course the ACT and the SAT are very similar. So with that, I'll go into our first question. We're going to go question by question through the whole thing, all 50 questions of our ACT 495 English section. Okay, so question one is a rhetoric question. We are asked if the writer were to delete the underlined portion, the paragraph would primarily lose something. All right, so if you're missing this question, it's likely that you're making a mistake, which is usually more common on the reading section, but also shows up on the writing as well, the English as well, which is we're making too broad of inferences. We're not sticking to the text itself. So from this sentence alone, in the context of this sentence, with this statement, this caveat about my idol and this paragraph as a whole, what does my idol serve to do? Well, it serves to show why our narrator is so interested in the guitar, right? It seems like the narrator is interested in the guitar because not only was her older sister into guitars, but her older sister was somebody that she really looked up to, right? So a lot of these answer choices are what we would call plausible, but not supported, right? So for example, it's a detail that specifies how much older the sister is compared to the narrator. If you chose that answer choice, I'd ask you, where in this paragraph do we find out how much older the sister is? We know that she is older, but we don't know whether it's by 10 minutes or 10 years, right? We have no idea. So we definitely don't specify that there. Additionally, growing up shows that she was relatively young, but this my idol part really show why or how she learned at a young age? No, not really, right? The my idol thing is there to point out that, why her sister playing guitar was of significance to her own pursuit. Finally, do we know how good her sister is at guitar? The narrator's sister is at guitar? No, we really can't, right? We know that she's interested in it, but hey, I'm interested in the guitar and I'm not good, right? So we can't choose D either. So the best pursuit is always to go through and get rid of the other answer choices that don't work, that have something wrong with it. After that, we're left with B. And we just want to say, right, it's an indication. Indication is really safe, right? It indicates, it suggests it. It doesn't say, it doesn't say it was the only reason why the narrator became interested. It was the main reason why the narrator became interested. No, we don't get any of those sort of claims there. So B is a very safe inference. A, C, and D all have something wrong with them. That's how we arrive to B by getting rid of A, C, and D. All right, so question two, we have a question about elaborations. All right, so the correct answer is in fact no change, okay, because what we have here is an elaboration, meaning everything that precedes this final elaboration is a independent clause, meaning it can stand on its own. So we can put a colon after that complete sentence to tack on an elaboration that clarifies what came before, right? So when my sister left Chicago for college in California, I began carting my guitar around everywhere. That could be on its own as a sentence, right? It would be a complex sentence. We have a dependent clause preceding and then an independent clause starting with I. Then we might want to know where everywhere is. So we're told to school, to work, to my friends' houses. So that's what we've learned. Now, these others are incorrect because if before we introduce a list, we need to make sure that we have a complete sentence if that list is serving as an elaboration. Now, if you did choose A, good job, but just remember, not every list can begin with a colon. It has to have a complete sentence in front of it in order to use a colon. So for question 3, we are asked which choice makes the sentence most grammatically acceptable. I want to point out what is wrong with these other ones. So with B, we have what's called a run-on because we have two independent clauses, and we are connecting them with an and without a comma. So that is what we call a run-on. D creates a comma splice, where we're connecting independent clauses or complete sentences with just a comma. If we're going to connect complete sentences, we need a comma and a fanboys. And then finally, C is wrong because this is an introductory phase, no matter where I was. And introductory phrases before a sentence always need a comma after the introductory phrase. So there's nothing wrong with A, and that is why B, C, and D are wrong, which is how we would arrive to A for question 3. All right, so 4 asks about redundancy. There's a habit for these to just think which one is the shortest and then choose that the shortest one is always correct. That's not always the case, but here it is, okay? So why is the shortest one correct? Well, there is redundancy on all of these other answer choices. So we already know, according to this passage, this paragraph, that our narrator is on an extended trip. Therefore, we don't need to mention again extended trip in any other answer choice, which is what gets rid of A and gets rid of B. Now, finally, we know where she is going. We know that she's going to Honolulu, Hawaii. We wouldn't need to assure again that our narrator is in Honolulu, Hawaii. We already know what the moment is, right? Which is right here. So we can basically just turn that whole moment, which is after landing in Honolulu, Hawaii for an extended trip, into just that, because everything else has been properly designated earlier in the paragraph. So that is how we arrived to D for this redundancy question on the ACT. All right, so question 5, we're asked which transition word is most logical within this context. So we have to make sure that we're understanding the previous paragraph in order to answer this question. If you didn't look at the context of the previous paragraph when you answered this question, that is going to be why you got it wrong, right? So this first sentence of the second paragraph here is going to respond to this one. So that means that this sentence needs to be related to the one before it. So what does this first paragraph say? It shows lots of concern, lots of worry, lots of stress. But then we see, in fact, she is not actually all that stressed anymore because she finds a ukulele. So what we'll need is a transition that falls into the pivot category. Which one is that? Though. Okay. Therefore doesn't work because that's a cause and effect where it's like thus. Instead doesn't work because that suggests there was an immediate choice, right? This, then I did this instead, right? We don't have a changing in opinion or decision. And we can't say otherwise because otherwise is not used as a transition or pivot just transition. It is rather like what we would use in order to demonstrate that's the thing. It's kind of like a pivot, but it has to refer to a alternate or contrasting situation, right? So we would have to suggest two hypothetical situations, right? We don't have that hypothetical here, which is why we get rid of otherwise. So that's how we arrive to though for question 5. Question 6 is a prepositions question. So prepositions are one of the trickier things, I think, on the SAT and the ACT because they're so intuitive, they're so straightforward. Sometimes we don't actually know the differences between these things, right? Upon and onto both signify a relationship of being above something. But is our narrator above the balmy Hawaiian air when they walk out? No. Amid suggests you are among things in a crowd, right? If you are amid, it suggests that there are multiple entities surrounding you. However, we want to suggest rather that you're within a broad substance. In the same way that you would step into uh, water, you would walk into the air, right? So that is why D is correct. If you missed this, go ahead and study prepositions. Question 7 is a question about tense. So we want to make sure that we are as clear, as short, and as precise as possible. So when we see a question like this, sometimes we might be thinking, which one is shortest is always going to be correct. But D doesn't work here. Why does D not work here? We don't have a subject, right? Who is our subject here, right? We don't know. Nor is there a verb that the subject would perform, okay? Now, C, again, similar issue with lingering there. We have a dependent clause that doesn't go anywhere. We don't have a subject for the sentence as a whole, right? So it's not actually even a dependent clause. It's just entirely a fragment. All right. B makes the same issue as C. So why is A best? Well, we have our subject. We have it in the proper tense, in the past tense, because we have bought up here. So we connect those two, see that we want it in the past tense. And we have our subject of the narrator. And now we have an independent clause going into the dependent clause here. And everything works out thus for question 7. All right, so question 8 is asking about grammar. Again, I just want to point out that many students sometimes think, whatever is shortest is best. But that is not always the case, okay? Why do C and D not work? Well, it isn't sufficient for the subject here. It's not a sufficient comparison, right? Why? Because does it refer to the UK, right, of the ukulele, or to the guitar? Well, we don't know unless we actually declare it. So it is what we would call an ambiguous pronoun, getting rid of C and D. Now, what's the difference between A and B? We have then versus than, right? Than with an A is for comparison, or I like to say A for analogy, right? So we're comparing two things together. So if we're comparing, we're going to use than with an A. Then is what we use for time. All right, first I did this, then I did that. All right, so A is best because we are comparing here. So that is why B is best because we're comparing here because we want the A and than. So that's why we're going to go with B. Why we're going to get rid of A because it says the wrong then. And then C and D don't work because we have the ambiguous pronoun of it. So that's how we arrive to B. All right, so notice that the question stem for question 9 is specific. If you're moving too quickly, you might assume that this is another one of those questions which has something like 8, which is most grammatically acceptable, 7, which is clearest and most precise, or even 4, which is least redundant, okay? But that is not what this question asks. 9 specifically asks, which choice best specifies the type of songs the narrator played on the ukulele, right? So, how do we know what that would be? Well, we see that this is that there, okay. Now, all of the following could be correct, okay? That's a thing with the ACT, but we want to choose the one that most clarifies what we have. Tropical tunes could mean something from Cuba, forever. Could be something from the Maldives, could be something from, parts of Mexico, right? Those are all tropical places. Could be something from Africa. But Hawaiian specifies that we're talking only about Hawaii, right? Music is the shortest answer choice, but that's not what this question asks. It asks for it to be most specific. D is as short as music, but it isn't asking what is shortest or most redundant. It's asking which best specifies it. So that's how we arrive to B for Hawaiian classics. For question 9, it does best specify that this is specifically Hawaiian music. All right, so question 10, I really want to point out one important aspect of the question stem. If you answer this without reading the question stem carefully enough, that's how you'd run into an error. So it is asking which question best emphasizes the point made in the first and second paragraphs. So you're going to have to go back to the first and second paragraphs to answer this question. It is not asking you which sounds the best. This question is not asking you which one feels the best. It's not asking you which one is the most succinct, which one has the best grammar. It is asking which one emphasizes the point made in the first and second paragraphs. So what is the point made in the first and second paragraphs? When we scroll back, this first paragraph talks about how her guitar felt like family, right? No matter where she was, her guitar felt like family. Secondly, our second paragraph says, no matter where I was, playing guitar made me feel a little bit closer to home, right? So both of our first two paragraphs are talking about family and home. Well, look at our correct answer choice for 10. Though I was without my guitar and far from family, the two things that our narrator associates with home, it felt like she was home nonetheless. Why? Well, because the ukulele did it. Now, C is correct not because it sounds the best or anything like that. It is only because it connects the most accurately with the first and second paragraphs, which is the task we were asked to do. All right. Neither A nor B nor D mentions whatsoever what we have from those first two paragraphs, except D does mention that it's a business trip. However, is she on a business trip? We don't entirely know. And more than anything, it doesn't directly connect to the most important central points made in the first and second paragraphs, which was that the guitar was really important for our narrator because it felt like a piece of home and a piece of family. So that wraps up our first passage. We'll move on to the second. Okay, so question 11 is asking about redundance. Usually these are pretty straightforward. Now, even though this is a instance where the shortest answer choice truly is the best answer, I don't want us just carte blanche thinking, every single time we come to a question about redundance, the shortest answer is always correct. That's not always the case, but it is here, and let's show why, okay? We see right here that she had ideas of her own. So any answer choice that mentions that including an idea is redundant, right? So A, B, and C all mention this idea thing. But we already know that we're talking about her ideas because it's referenced in the clause directly in front of it. So for that reason, we go with D, because it is the only one that doesn't repeat something we already said elsewhere in the passage. Question 12 is another rhetoric question, like we saw a couple of in the previous passage. So we are told that at this point, the writer is considering dividing the paragraph into two. Making this change would help to organize the essay by doing something, okay? So we are not being asked whether the author should or should not separate the paragraph into two. We are trying to give an argument as for why separating this paragraph into two would be beneficial. So we're just going to do it, right? We're assuming that this is actually happening. So let's look through the distractors. Let's look through each answer choice and try to find something wrong. I always want us looking for what's wrong as opposed to what is right. So this first paragraph says this first answer choice says that this paragraph gives an analysis of her first invention. And then the second one would be another invention that she developed. But we know that's not true, right? Our first paragraph says that she had ideas for a torpedo with a radio-controlled guidance system. And then we see this explaining that radio-controlled guidance system. All right. So there is not more than one invention at play here, right? There are two inventions. Okay. C would be true if it were an earlier part in the paragraph. However, we see this transitions coming right here, right? Coming there, we already have moved into the conception of her invention. This part would be in the first part of the paragraph already. So if this transition came more like up here, then C could be true, but that is not where we're given the pivot, all right? That's not where we're given the possible separation. Finally, Lamar's childhood not up here, not important. So D is completely irrelevant. All right. Um, so with B, why is this true? So here we get the origination of her thing, right? The fact that she wants to help out Europe because she cared about Europe and because she was quote unquote bored on Hollywood sets. And then we know that this paragraph explains how she intended for her invention to work. So that's how we get B for 12, which is our correct answer. Okay, so question 13 is asking us about a grammatically acceptable sentence. This is a verb tense question. All right, so simply put, every one of these incorrect answer choices makes the same mistake in that whether it's A with is, B with has, or D with is, it suggests that the subject of our sentence is a singular subject. But that is not what our subject is. So if you chose A, B, or D, it's likely that you thought one frequency was our subject, but one frequency is not our subject. Our subject is radio signals on that frequency. So is radio signals singular or plural? Well, pretty straightforward. It is plural, right? So the only verb that conjugates plural of our answer choices is C, all right? So this is a pretty straightforward one in terms of why A, B, and D are wrong, why C is correct. But if you didn't realize that radio signals was the real subject as opposed to frequency, I can understand why you may have been stumped. So always look for the real subject. I would always recommend underlining or highlighting or whatever tool you have to designate the subject for a question like 13. All right, so 14 is asking about how do we produce transitions with punctuation? So if you missed this question, I have a feeling you may have chosen an answer choice like B. You may have learned from a teacher or from a parent or someone that anytime we use a transitional adverb like however or therefore, we need to put a semicolon in front and a comma after. But that is not the case. If that transition comes at the beginning of a clause, we could construct it as we do with B. However, transitions can come at the end of a clause or they can come in the middle. But if they do come in the middle, they need to have punctuation separating it out as an interruption. All right. So we need to have it within a pair of commas because it's interrupting the flow of the sentence, right? It's something of a interjection. Okay. C is wrong because we don't have that second punctuation. D is wrong because it has none. Okay, so anytime we use a transition, we have punctuation before and after it. If it's at the beginning of a clause, it's going to come after either a period or a semicolon, before a comma. If it's at the end of a clause, it's going to come after a comma and then before a period or a semicolon. But if it's in the middle of a clause, we're going to use a pair of commas. Now, why do we know that this needs to be in the middle of this clause? Well, because it is literally in the middle of this clause. Remember, whenever we use a semicolon, whatever's to the left and to the right of it needs to be a complete sentence. Check this with B. Is the phrase, in the decades after the war, is that a complete sentence? No. Therefore, we cannot use a semicolon there because we don't have a complete sentence on either side of that semicolon. All right, so question 15 is a question type that students have a lot of trouble with. A lot of times we're thinking about things that actually aren't even relevant to where the sentence should be placed. We think about abstractions like quote unquote flow or what sounds good. But really we just need to look at a couple of things. First parameter is always going to be, does the sentence introduce something that we already mentioned elsewhere in the paragraph? Or does it rely on something that was introduced elsewhere in the paragraph? If so, we need to put it in the appropriate place so that it introduces things or is being introduced by whatever comes before it. We also want to look at dates, time, right? If we're talking about the morning at the end of a paragraph and we're talking about that same night at the beginning of a paragraph, unless we've clarified it correctly, it probably isn't the right order. So for 15, really straightforward, sentence 3 is talking about then in 1942, all right? So this then in 1942 is fine coming after in 1940, right? So it's fine coming after the sentences 1 and 2, but then it comes before June 1941. Now, does that make sense? No. All right. So sentence 3 has to come after sentence 4 because the then in 1942 has to come after the events that happened chronologically in 1941. So that's why it's C. That's why it can't be anywhere else. You know, we can't talk about 1942 before we talk about 1941 in the chronological sequence of this paragraph. Okay, so 16 is a very classic sort of question we'll see on the ACT. It's difficult because students get this notion that on the ACT and the SAT, typically the shortest answer choice is correct. But that is not always true, especially if the question stem is very particular. So let's look at this question stem. We are asked to emphasize that the declassification of this thing that was invented, we need to specify that that was a turning point in the history of communication technology. All right. So a turning point in the history means a radical change, a transformation. So our answer choice needs to show that it happened in communication technology and that something very significant happened. B does both of those things, right? We have communication landscape. We have a word like transformed, which means significant change. So C is correct in part. We have communications. That's good. But had an impact on is far too small to demonstrate what we're looking for as a turning point. D, I like this revolutionized, but things is far too vague. Now, finally, A, even though it's really short, isn't good because we don't know what we're talking about here. So if you chose A or D, you're thinking, this is good because it's short, but really we're trying to accomplish a very specific goal asked by the test, which is the only one that accomplishes that is B. All right, so question 17 is a really great one because if we're moving too quickly, we are probably going to choose A. But we need to see that. Now, why? Why would we choose A? Because we see, okay, there's a pair of commas around something. That's something that we typically do in order to create a non-essential phrase. And you always need to use a pair of punctuation in order to create a non-essential phrase. So moving too mindlessly, too quickly on a quickly paced ACT might make you choose 17, A. However, if you were to read the whole thing, the whole sentence like we request, you would see, there's a dash at the end here. And in fact, everything from cellular phones to GPS is a non-essential phrase. So you need to keep the content of that non-essential phrase all within the same type of punctuation, the same pair of punctuation. So what is that pair of punctuation we're going to use? Well, because we end in a dash, we need to also begin it with a dash. That is why B is correct. Now, if you chose C because you think, anytime I see a list, I can begin a list with a colon. Well, remember, everything before a colon, anytime you use one, has to be a complete sentence. Is devices that operate wirelessly a complete sentence? No, that is not a complete sentence. All right, so that's how we arrive to B for question 17. Make sure you know the rules of non-essential phrases and really follow it all the way down for a question like 17. Okay, 18 is a very, very classic question we would see on either the ACT or the SAT. We are doing a subject-verb agreement question. We want to make sure that our verb right here, which is conjugating the verb function, to our subject. Okay, now, what makes these questions difficult is we oftentimes see a lot of information between our subject and our verb. Right? So everything from here to here is a non-essential phrase. It is not relevant to determining the tense or the number of our verb, okay? Our actual subject is all the way up here. It is devices, all right? Devices. So is devices plural or singular? It's plural, okay? So we need a verb that aligns with that plural situation. So we go with function, all right? We don't want to delete this because that would be not an independent clause to say devices that operate wirelessly because of Lamar's idea. We don't have a verb now for that clause, so it can't stand on its own. To function is the wrong sense, as is functioning, okay? So everything is given away by going all the way back to the subject. Make sure you're connecting the subject to the verb itself for a question like 18. All right, so 19 is ultimately asking about redundancy. we also need to make sure we're in the proper tense and need to be in the active voice. So what's wrong with some of these answer choices? This to receive infinitive is wrong there. That's what's wrong in C. The dash in B creates a non-necessary elaboration. Remember, anything before a dash either needs to be a complete sentence or the dash needs to be creating a non-essential phrase, none of which is happening. And then A is a useless addition of a pronoun to describe Lamar and Anthiel. We already have that. So D is our correct answer. It is the most concise and precise way of doing this. All right, so 20 is a classic example of going by way of sensibility, okay? We need to make sure that we are having the right relationship between this sentence and the next sentence, okay? So the first sentence says, it wasn't until 1996 that they were finally given credit. It was at that time we find that they were awarded the Pioneer Award. So in order to show that, we need either a cause and effect transition or an agreeing transition, or really we need none at all, right? Transitions aren't always necessary. So, or really never necessary. A and B are both wrong because they both are pivoting transitions. And then C, this anyway, usually means that we're going to discuss something after what we would call a digression, right? Is this sentence before the current one a digression, meaning a kind of distraction that wanders away from the main claim of the text? No, not whatsoever. So that's how we arrive to D for question 20 and finish up the second passage for this ACT English section. All right, so question 20 is a pretty straightforward verb subject agreement question. We're looking for the right tense here. Clarification, right? They are is what there means. We don't want they, that's a pronoun. We're talking about there being certain things. So how many are there? There are some 45,000, right? And they are our turbines. So those two things give away that we have a plural subject, meaning we need to conjugate our verb to the plural. We can get rid of D because is not what we want. That's not plural. We can get rid of C for two reasons, there being the wrong form of there and is being singular. So pretty easy here. We're going to go with B. You want to make sure that you have your plural pronoun in there or your plural verb. If you miss this question, you got to make sure you know the difference between your theirs, and you want to make sure that you are checking the number of the subject for the verb. So question 22, we have what we call a non-essential phrase. Non-essential phrases are phrases that do not need to be in the sentence in order for the sentence to function as a proper independent clause. So you can always check by taking out the non-essential phrase and seeing if the sentence works without it, which it does, right? Serving the turbine is a serious challenge is certainly a sentence on its own, right? So everything from those long fiberglass veins that slice through the air is a non-essential phrase. Now, when we do a non-essential phrase, we need to make sure that the pair of punctuation we use for that non-essential phrase is the same throughout. So whatever you start it, you need to end with. So you can use either a pair of commas, a pair of dashes, or a pair of parentheses. What's wrong with D? Well, D, we don't have the following comma. What's wrong with A? A, we don't have the first comma. What's wrong with C? We're mixing a dash and a comma. So D identifies properly that there is a non-essential phrase, and it uses the pair of dashes to do it, which is one of the ways we're allowed to. All right, so question 23 is asking really a modifiers question. So this thing coming beforehand, after completing specialized training, the word right after that is going to need to be the noun that actually does that specialized training. So who is doing the specialized training? Rock climbers. So rock climbers needs to be the noun coming right after that comma. Otherwise, like for example, answer choices B and C are wrong because B says old skills completed the training, which doesn't make sense. C says careers completing the training, which doesn't make sense. And then finally, D suggests that ideal rope technicians can be made out of rock climbers. That suggests that the rope technicians went through the training, which isn't necessarily wrong, but it's in the passive voice. We want to have the active voice like A. So that is how we get to A for 23. On a modifier question, if you miss this, make sure you study how to correct modifier issues. All right, so 24, we are told that all of the choices are true, which would be the most effective introduction to the paragraph. So really make sure you're reading that stem. This question stem isn't asking which sounds the best, which is the most grammatically correct. What this is asking us is, can you align our introduction with the content of the rest of this paragraph? So what is this paragraph about? When you read through it, you'll realize this is all about safety, right? Even though these people are high up on ropes, on a wind turbine that is huge, they are not dying, okay? So too much. So we want to talk about safety and the priority of safety. So B is wrong because it's talking about the opposite of safety, right? This is all the ways that it is relatively safety. These are the precautions that are taken. C can be true, but does that have to do with danger and safety? No. Same with A. A and C kind of make the same error. So D is best. It's better than B because it's focusing on safety and the safety protocols that they take, as opposed to the way in which their safety protocols do not work, right? Like B would. So that's why we prefer D for question 24. All right, so for 25, we could use a semicolon to connect two independent clauses, right? We have two independent clauses here. Technicians work in pairs and they don't climb in high winds, extreme temperatures, or precipitation. But if we have two independent clauses and we're connecting them with a semicolon, we cannot have this word right here. We cannot have while, because while is what we call a subordinator. While makes that second clause a dependent clause, one which cannot stand on its own. If you connect a dependent clause to an independent clause with a semicolon, you're making a mistake because either side of a semicolon is something that can stand on its own as a sentence. But does this work as a sentence? While they don't climb in high winds, extreme temperatures, or precipitation? No, that's not a sentence on its own. So we have to get rid of A, not because of the semicolon, but because it adds a subordinating clause. C doesn't work because it is what we call a comma splice. We cannot connect two independent clauses with just a comma. Even though it's shorter, it doesn't work. D is a run-on. If we're going to connect these two independent clauses, we can use a comma with a fanboys coordinating conjunction like and. So that is why B is correct and these others are incorrect. If you chose A, you just had to get rid of that word while. All right, so question 26 is a very similar question to one we saw earlier up here on question 22. In that 26 is a non-essential phrase question. So non-essential phrases are things, parts of a sentence that we don't need to be in the sentence in order for the sentence to function. So, for example, precautions such as these make the job quite safe. That is a complete sentence on its own, so we don't need this along with rigorous procedures and trainings for the sentence to work. However, because we want it in the sentence, it's useful, helpful information, we're going to add it as a non-essential phrase. Now, with non-essential phrases, however you end or begin the non-essential phrase in terms of punctuation is how you have to do the other side, right? You have to use the same punctuation mark on either end of a non-essential phrase. So A is wrong because it mixes and matches a dash with a comma, all right? B is wrong because you cannot use a semicolon to make a non-essential phrase. This semicolon, we would need the left and the right of it to be complete sentences, and precautions such as these is not a complete sentence. D is a run-on, all right? It would suggest that we don't have a non-essential phrase here when we actually do. C does everything legally, right? By using the comma beginning, we combine it with the comma that goes at the end to create a non-essential phrase within a pair of matching commas, which is exactly what we are allowed to do. All right, 27 is another pretty straightforward grammar question. We are being asked to make sure that our subject is in agreement with its verb, right? So our verb and our subject have to be in the same conjugation, meaning they have to be the same number, either singular or plural, and the same tense, the same time. All right, so precautions is our subject. This question, like 27, is very, very typical on both the ACT and the SAT, where we put a non-essential phrase, watch 26 to learn about those, between our subject of precautions and our verb of make, right? So precautions is a plural. We're in the present tense, so we're going to go with the plural verb, all right? That's why we're going with A. B is wrong because we go into a singular verb. Remember, the S at the end of a verb makes it singular, unlike with nouns, the opposite. C is wrong because it is both singular and in the past tense. And B is wrong because of this singularity with is. So if you notice that precautions is plural, you'll be able to get rid of B, C, and D because all of those answer choices are conjugated to the singular. A is the only one which properly identifies our subject of precautions as a plural noun. All right, so 28, a lot of times when it says clearest and most precise, students have the intention to just choose the shortest answer. And very often that's a very effective idea, but we don't want to do that as a rule. It's certainly not a rule. Why? Well, you sometimes see questions like 28. 28 is ultimately asking a question about what we call parallel structure. So here we have a connection of like units, okay? Basically meaning we have a list. Fresh air, great vistas, and ample time off, all right? All of these items in the list need to start off with this adjective, all right? That has something to do with qualifying the noun of either air, vistas, time, or in this case, practice, right? So answer choices A, B, and C all make the mistake of changing that structure of starting off with an adjective to describe the verb or the, in this case, the kind of like the nounified thing, right? So we have to say plenty at the beginning because plenty is an adjective that describes climbing practice, just like the rest of these. That needs to come first. So parallel structure for 28. If you missed this, you were, I would assume, applying a general approach that's oftentimes right as a rule, when it is certainly not a rule. The only rules we have are the real grammar rules. All right, so 29 is a tricky question because this question stem is very important. So many of these answer choices could work at the end of this essay, but only one is going to actually fit what they are requesting the writer wants to do, right? So the writer wants to show that rock climbers may like this occupation. So our answer choice has to reference rock climbers, right? And neither A nor D references rock climbers, which is why those are wrong. Now, what's the difference between B and C? B focuses on what inspires rock climbers, right? Which presumably would talk about rock climbing. But we know we're talking about the fact that rock climbers actually would like the job of using their rope skills in order to work on wind turbines, okay? So only answer choice C actually aligns with the goals of this answer choice. Now, or this question stem. So make sure you're reading the question stems for everything on the ACT. This is a classic way to get mixed up for question 29. All right, question 30 is a question type that a lot of students have trouble with on the ACT, but it actually is pretty straightforward when you give it some thought. When we are asked to add a following sentence in a particular place, we're not thinking about flow, we're not thinking about vibe, we're thinking about what does it logically do? This sentence, enter rock climbers, introduces the idea of rock climbers to this passage. So you cannot introduce this too late. If enter rock climbers, this phrase were to come after rock climbers are introduced anywhere else in the essay, it would be incorrect, right? So where are rock climbers first introduced? Well, right here, okay, in paragraph 2. Why we couldn't put it for paragraph 3? Well, we've already talked about rock climbers in paragraph 2. So anywhere after paragraph 2 is not going to work because this phrase is introducing rock climbers. So the only answer choice that is like in paragraph 2 or earlier is A. So I don't even really need to check these other ones, though you could and understand that, okay, all of these other ones, 4, 5, and 6, all clearly come after rock climbers have already been introduced. So therefore, it's illogical to introduce them again, right? So where's the introductory part? Paragraph 2. That's what the role of that sentence would be that they ask for us to add. So that's where we would put it for question 30. Now we'll move on to our fourth passage now that we have finished passage 3. All right, question 31 is one of those questions where we really got to make sure that we are reading the question stem itself, right? So I'm assuming that if you missed a question like 31, it's because you thought the question was asking something more conventional, like which of the following is most grammatically correct or most precise. Or you may have thought that we're looking for what sounds best, what is the most flow, but those are all arbitrary things, okay? What we really need to be doing is look, where is the painting on display? Which of these says where the painting's on display, okay? So A has a location, but that isn't where it is painting, where the painting is hanging, excuse me. That's just saying where the setting of the painting was, okay? So wrong spot. Those who see it on display, we don't know where they're seeing it on display. D, it's been on display, but does it say where? No. Okay, so only C says where it is on display. If you chose A, you, I suppose, confused being where it's on display with where its setting was. All right, so 32 is ultimately a redundancy question. Okay, so we are wanting to say that this artist made something which a painting that of the event that ended the Constitutional Convention. Okay, so clearest and most precise always includes a notion of the concision and precision element. Okay, so we just want to choose the answer choice that does everything it needs to do as quickly as possible, which is what concluded does. All right, finished off is not any clearer than concluded. In fact, it's less clear. Ended in the conclusion of an event that ended in the conclusion of something, you could just say ended, right? Couldn't you just say ended? And finally, served the final role of ending the Constitutional Convention is pretty unclear. All right, so we just want to clearly and succinctly state that we're talking about something ending, and concluded does that best. Don't let the question stem throw you off when we're asked for clearest, most precise. Concision and precision is a part of that. A word that it means exactly what we want it to mean and does it as quickly as possible. All right, so 33 asks for clearest and most precise in context. That includes precision and concision. All right, so we want to make sure, so Christie's prior preparations in advance of the work. Okay, what's wrong with that? So prior preparation in advance of the work means preparations before or the work twice, right? In advance of something means before and prior means before. Okay, so we have redundancy issue there. And look at this, we have the same redundancy issue in C, because preceding something means coming before it. All right, finally, B, leading up to, and preparation work, both have the connotation of doing something ahead of something. All right, the only answer choice that says everything we need to as succinctly as possible is answer choice D. Okay, so sometimes the ACT will ask this by saying, which of the following choices is least redundant in context? Sometimes we will be asking which choice is clearest and most precise in context. Either way, the strategy of precision and concision is essential for something like this, which is what we have with 33. Remember, you don't need to say the idea of a thing more than once, and in advance, or prior, or preceding, or leading up to, or preparation are all words meaning things you're doing before you do the actual thing. So let's just use the one most precise word we can use, just like the question stem asks. All right, so 34, if you missed it, this is what we would call a prepositions question. So prepositions determine or signify relationships of space, okay? So space and time and things like that. We need to make sure that we have this word into. The reason why A is correct, why we must have this word into, is because we need to know that the inkwells are a receptacle, right? And the quills are going inside of them in order to get the ink. Okay. Of which would mean it's from somewhere. Simply which doesn't show where that they're going into something. We could have assumed it's on. Um, and finally, D, deleting this, we lose the preposition that we need in order to clarify the space. All right, so we need to clarify this spatial dynamic. Um, uh, so if we had maybe into here, it could have worked, but no change is the best way to use a preposition to designate the relationship between these two objects moving within space. Prepositions are really tricky because they're very, very intuitive, but at the same time, we may not have learned all those rules or learned what each preposition does. So if you missed a question like 34, I'd suggest you study prepositions. Oops. All right, so for a question like 35, it's really important that we take note of meaning. Okay, so this question is ultimately asking, which of these shows the right proper meaning? Okay, so I want to point out an answer choice like D. A lot of times when we see a question, STEM like 35, asking for clearest and most precise, students want to jump to, oh, whatever is the shortest is best. But if you were to remove the word noting here, this sentence would suggest that he scoured countless drawings of period furniture and fabrics, of color, of texture, and of design, right? Now, uh, that is not what that's not what he's doing, right? He's not scouring countless drawings of things including furniture, fabrics, color, texture, and design. Instead, he is noting or looking at the color, texture, and design that makes up the period furniture and fabrics. So even though D is our shortest answer, unlike previous examples like 32 and 33, where the shortest answer was the correct answer, here it changes the meaning. So we want to show that he did these things and took note of these actions, all right? We want to have what's called the gerund, where we're an active thing, right? He's doing something. We verb it, okay? Which is why A is correct. Okay. Um, because they were noted, color, texture, and design doesn't make any sense. I don't know what this they would be referring to. That's quite confusing. There's many things that I just don't understand what C could possibly offer that would be better than noting. Um, and then finally, B uh, is a very roundabout way of saying noting and also passive and longer than needed to be. So that's how we arrive to A for question 35. All right, so question 36 is a question type that a lot of students have trouble with at first glance, but ultimately there is a very rigorous way in which we can properly understand where a sentence belongs, okay? So any sentence is going to have a time referent or a clue that's going to show whether it needs to come before or after something else. So in this sentence, his trip is the really important word here. Okay. Now, why is his trip so important? It means that this sentence cannot come before any sentence which has already which hasn't already mentioned the trip, right? So that means why it cannot be A is because it cannot come before the first time the trip is referenced in sentence two, right? Now, it makes sense to come after sentence two because his trip is referring back to this here, right? Including a visit. Now, the things that take place on his trip are going to take place after when he deliberately planned it to take place, right? So the items of lines sentences 3, 4, and 5 all will need to come after the introduction to the trip and the why of the trip and the when of the trip in this sentence. So it makes sense for the sentence to come right here, right between sentences 2 and 3, which is what answer choice B offers us. Now, after sentence three and four, answer choices C and D are, it's not as though that sentence can't come in those places, but it would make much more sense for this sentence to come after sentence two because his trip is referring to the trip, the visit that is referenced directly in the sentence ahead of it, right? So it is most logical to be connected to what comes before it, or to be connected to when the trip introduces itself in sentence two. So always look for that referent, like we have here for 36, his trip, and that will guide you to the right direction for a question of this same type, these rhetoric questions. All right, so question 37 is, in my opinion, probably going to be the most missed question on test 495. Question 37 is very tricky, but it is not very hard. Okay. So we don't need a word that. So I just want to explain why B is correct. You don't need the word that for B, but imagine the word that is there right now, and you'll see that this is a very straightforward sentence, right? For example, in Emanuel Lutz's Washington Crossing the Delaware, the president strikes a noble pose on a boat that experts now agree would not have been the vessel that carried the revolutionary leader across the river. Okay, so doesn't that make perfect sense as such? Yes, right? Once we add the word that, it should be really clear to us. But that is not there, okay? So I can understand us having read this and missed that on that basis. But let's look, this is the classic example as to why I want us working backwards. I want us looking for what's wrong rather than what's right. The first thing I'd point out is A and C. Is there a difference between A and C in terms of how they function as a grammatical unit? No, not whatsoever. A period or a semicolon to separate clauses functions exactly the same way, right? These two punctuation marks function in the exact same form or the exact same way if we're separating two units of information like clauses. So how would we be able to choose between A and C if they were correct? We couldn't, right? We wouldn't be able to. And now we know they're wrong as well once we check and see that this is not a clause. In this thing, the president strikes a noble pose on a boat, and then experts now agree that could not have been the vessel that carried the revolutionary leader across the river. Experts to river cannot be a clause. It's not an independent clause, especially, right? So that's why we get rid of A and C. Now, why can it not be D? Because D suggests that from experts to river is its own dependent clause, or that, for example, on a boat is a dependent clause. But experts now agree could not have been the vessel that carried the revolutionary leader across the river is not a clause. Why is it not a clause? It lacks a subject, right? There's no subject here. Why? Because the subject is a boat, right? But it's not in the same clause if it's coming after this comma, right? So we can get rid of A, C, and D. I think also once you look at those just intuitively on their own, after you, check them out, I think you can see A, C, and D are just clearly wrong, and B is totally fine. But B just looks weird to our eyes, which is why I want to remind you guys that the eye test is a good indication at first of what to look for, but it should not be our final check. Just our eyes and our ears, does this sound good? Does this look good? Should not be our final step for determining an answer choice on the ACT nor the SAT, right? We need to apply actual grammar rules in order to make our final answer decision, okay? Using our eyes and ears to lead us in the right direction is smart, but once we get close to the finish line, we need to apply the rules we have learned either with your tutor, with your teacher in class, or in other Hamilton resources. So that's how we get to B for this really tricky question 37. All right, so 38 has a lot of answer choices that are wrong because of improperly used commas. Okay, so let's remember what commas do. Commas can be used to signal a non-essential phrase. They can be used to create a list, They can be used to signal a non-essential elaboration using the word which, or they can be used to signal kind of an introductory phrase like a transition. But here, I think if you miss this, you maybe chose an answer choice like A because you saw, this looks like a transition. But is in another functioning as a transition here? No. Why? Because we're not talking about a painting that like this, right? Um, we're trying to say that this is a different painting of the signing of the U.S. Constitution from the one that our main painter, Christie, is making, right? Um, so uh, that means in another has to be part of the same subject or the same noun. In another painting is our noun here. So we cannot separate another from painting. So that gets rid of A. Why can't we do B? That suggests if we choose B, that of the US Constitution is a non-essential phrase. But if we don't have of the US Constitution there, we don't know what is being signed. We now have an unclear subject, right? But on the ACT or the SAT, we always need a clear subject. So we can't make of the US Constitution a non-essential phrase. D is wrong for very similar reasons, right? In another painting, artist Barry Faulkner plays the figures in a Roman ruin. I mean, what figures, right? What kind of painting is this? Why would that be unclear? Because of the signing of the US Constitution would be removed from this sentence. You know, how could we know that Barry Faulkner's painting is historically inaccurate if we don't know what the action is taking place in a Roman ruin, right? If this was of, like marauding Visigoths or Ostrogoths in Rome under King Alaric, it would make sense for them to be in a Roman ruin because they conquered Rome and made it a ruin. We have to know where this thing is taking place in order to use the proper, in order to understand the proper meaning. So remember, even though this is asking just what is most grammatically correct, it always has to get back to meaning. So what does C do? C says that there is another painting of the signing of the U.S. Constitution, another referring to, different from Christie's painting, where the artist places the figures, signing the U.S. Constitution in the 1700s in a Roman ruin. Of course, that's historically inaccurate, right? And that's all good because we have a dependent clause coming before the comma after Constitution, no commas before that, and then we have an independent clause after. So 38 is totally grammatically correct if we choose answer choice C. And there's a comma mistake in A, B, and D. All right, so question 39 is another really typical and important question for us to see from the ACT, because very often I think students, when they see a question stem asking, which is clearest and most precise in context, they want to go for the shortest answer choice, right? Something like A or D here. However, clearest and most precise doesn't always mean choose the shortest. It oftentimes is the shortest. That's what we saw on choices 32 and 33. The shortest was correct, but is not always the shortest. So why can we not use A or D in this instance, for example? Luminaries as Benjamin Franklin and James Madison, we are missing out on, we're suggesting that they are like a luminary, right? As without a such means that we're comparing something that's not present, okay? Why do we need the such here? Because we need to make sure that we, as the reader, know that we are saying that these men, Benjamin Franklin and James Madison, are part of this crowd of luminaries, right? They are examples of these luminaries. In order to give this example, we need this such. C doesn't work either because of the who are luminaries. Who are luminaries as Benjamin Franklin and James Madison reads as a question. But of course, this isn't a question. This is a non-essential phrase that is clarifying who these assembled men are. So why do we use such as Basically, it's like anytime we want to introduce an example for something that is like not, or we use such as when we're introducing an example that's part of a non-essential phrase. All right. Um, if we aren't giving the such as, then we're suggesting that it is either essential or that we're making a comparison. Ultimately, A, C, and D all change the meaning of this sentence, which is why B is correct. Always focusing on meaning for things like this. All right, so question 40 is a question type that students oftentimes have difficulty with, but it's actually a relatively straightforward question type once we understand what we're looking for, what we're hunting for. So we're asking, where does paragraph 3 belong? All right, so why paragraph 3 needs to belong where it is right now, okay, because we already know that the correct answer is A. We know it needs to belong where it is right now because this is a very important first sentence. Such measures may seem standard, but it is not the case. So, such measures means that we are referring to something that was explicitly stated in the previous sentences. So, what comes before such measures must be steps to make a historical painting. Now, it just so happens that already paragraph 2 before paragraph 3 details those measures, right? So what were the measures? Hunting down the portraits of the signers, scouring, period furniture and fabrics, going out there at the right time of year to check out what the light would look like. All of those things are the measures that don't that seem like they should be the standard, but actually aren't always the standard. Okay. So it's nice to have it be where it is. It's nice to be able to choose where it is now because we don't really have to check. Um, but uh, that's why it belongs there. If this paragraph were placed anywhere else in this essay, we would still need to move it to where it is now. All right. Um, So where it goes isn't all that important. The most important thing is such measures. So any question like 40, just like a question like 36, there's some bit of information in the sentence or the paragraph that gives away where it must be. In this case, it was the word such measures. Right? So hunt out for that bit of information that must be related to something that either has to come before it or has to come after it. And then you can put the puzzle pieces into place and get this kind of question correct. All right, so question 41, it's kind of nice that they gave us a question stem for this one because they really didn't need to. Ultimately, this is what we call parallel structure. All right, in that we want to make sure that we maintain the particular construction of how we show related items in a sentence. So either whether it be items in a list or something like that. Okay, so here we have items in a list. And every single item um, starts off with this kind of like moving thing, right? So what did we see before? Layers of petals, intricate spirals and rosettes, teardrops bending within circles, and dizzying mazes of lines. Lines. All right. Um, so we need to make sure that we start and show like what actually is happening, right? So what the shape is. And the only one that shows what the shape is would be A or C, right? B and D, neither of them show what the shape would be, right? Now, this idea that they're mazes. Now, what's the difference between A and C? Well, everything else is kind of in this blank of blank format, right? And it shows kind of the creation of this cacophony that she has in her art, which C downplays, right? We like this adjective dizzying, right? That is very much the stylistic thing that we see earlier in the sentence, right? So, intricate spirals and rosettes, right? Bending, dizzying. We like all these adjectives. We want to keep these adjectives up. That's why we're going to go with A for 41. So just make sure you're following that sort of style shape thing. Okay, so 42 is a question that this question type has kind of offered problems to students forever, but ultimately it's a little more straightforward than you might think. The main thing I want us to do is to look at the question, the answer explanation portion, right? I'm less interested in kept versus deleted than I am in the explanations. Okay. So, for example, A, does it actually compare Peng Xiong's embroidery style to that of modern Page Natab? No, it doesn't compare them, right? There is no comparison between her current style and other modern styles, right? It doesn't say whether she does it in the lighter, softer shades or not, right? Um, B, is this true? What is the subject of the essay? The subject of the essay is of our artist and what she is doing. It's already going to be in the modern context elsewhere if you'll read through, because it talks about her being in the modern context. We don't need to know that these lighter, softer shades are a thing. This kind of irrelevant detail ultimately isn't necessary up here as the subject of the essay to make it in the modern context. Um, C, now, does this detract from the paragraph's focus on various styles of ancient Hmong needlework arts? No, right? We don't learn about really any other needlework arts here, okay? So the various part is what makes C wrong. So ultimately, why is it D? Well, it does add an irrelevant detail, like we said, all right? And ultimately, we're talking about our subject being the artist and her connection to Pajnatab. Does this have anything to do with our artist? No. Pajnatab is not the subject of this essay. Our artist doing Pajnatab is. The Pajnatab is almost incidental. So that's how we arrive to D for question 42. All right, so 43 is asking, where do we want to put this unit of underlined language? Okay, so what is this underlined portion? What will we call this? This is what we call a non-essential phrase. And what it is going to do is elaborate on the thing that comes before it. All right, so whatever it comes next to, whatever it comes after, has to be what it is describing. So what are these? This is all clothing, right? These are all items of dress, a shirt, a dress, a coat, and a collar. These are all items of clothing. So we need to put it after clothing because it describes what kind of clothing is being used, right? Now, cloth is not what we want, right? Because it's not, we're just describing clothing. So the only place that it can go is after the thing that it is describing, right? And commonly as a shirt, dress, and coat describes what kind of clothing is used, what kind of clothing flower cloth can be used to make. All right, so that's why we'll put it there. The other ones simply, they don't work because it has to come after what it's describing, and it isn't describing made, it isn't describing needlework, nor is it describing cloth. So that's why it is C for 43. All right, so if you missed question 44, I presume that the issue is that you didn't really read directly the question stem. All right, so the question stem is asking which builds on the information provided earlier in the sentence. So what is provided earlier? Elephant's foot, snail house, images of animals, geometric designs, okay? Of those four things, three of them have to do with animals or the natural world, right? So what is going to build on that? Something that has to do with the natural world, which is why we go with D. Any of these answer choices could be fine. They could sound fine, right? But the issue is that A, B, and C don't answer the specific question asked by the STEM in question 44, where we're being asked to build on the information provided earlier in the list. Okay, so if you miss a question like 44, it's likely that you ran out of time or you're short on time because you spent too much time elsewhere on the English section. Okay. This is a question that we're going to get correct if we spend enough time to actually read the question stem. Don't presume what's being asked of you on any question on any ACT or SAT for that matter. Right? If you do that, it's a recipe for making a mistake on a question you otherwise could have got correct. All right, so 45 is a punctuation question. It's asking us about how we connect adjectives in front of a noun. So what is our noun here? Our noun is stitches, right? In either of these answer choices. So we are trying to determine whether we need a comma between tiny and tight or not, and the comma after, right? So we need a comma between tiny and tight because tiny describes stitches and tight describes stitches. Tiny doesn't describe tight, right? So the way to check this for yourself is to think, can I put the word and between these two adjectives? If so, then what you want to do is put a comma between the two. You could say tiny and tight stitches, right? So that gets rid of our answer choices B and D because there's no comma between tiny and tight. Now, what is the difference between A and C? This might be why you missed this, is you didn't notice this comma after stitches. So why can there be no comma after stitches? Because we have just two things that are describing the use that separates Pajnatab from other Hmong needlework arts. So we don't want to have a comma between stitches and the word and, because that would suggest that several complex techniques has its own independent clause or the final item in a list when this is not a list. For example, if someone were to ask you to describe yourself and you said you were, tall and handsome or something like that, you wouldn't put a comma between tall and then the word and, right? If you were asked what you think of your teacher and you think that the teacher is mean and dumb, you're not going to say mean, comma, and dumb, right? We're just putting two things together. And in this case, what are we putting together? The use of tiny stitching and complex techniques, right? So there's no comma after and or before and, which is why we have to get rid of answer choice A and arrive to answer choice C for 45. Make sure you read everything about every answer choice for a question like this. That's probably why you missed this, is you didn't. All right, so question 46 is just a simple verb tense question. I want to show you where our verb tense is shown earlier. We see cut out from. Okay, so we have the same prepositional phrase on top of and out from on both sides. So we just need to say in the same way that if something is cut out from something else, that happened in the past, because a cut can only happen in the past, right? The act of cutting is something that only happens in the past. We have to, add it on top. Adding puts us in motion. It's like it's happening right now, which isn't working. We need it to be a verb, as an addition is not a verb. And then C in the infinitive form to add them on top of the thing. We don't want the to there. It's not necessary, okay? So ultimately, we're just going to go with the simple past tense, just like we have in our example up here, to go with D for 46. All right, so 47 is a very important question to see for an ACT or an SAT because very, very often when we see a question like this, what is least redundant in context, we want to just choose the shortest answer. But why can we not choose an answer choice like A or D, even though those are short, right? It isn't just that the its or the there determines whether it's wrong or not. It's that what surface is being talked about when we're using a pronoun to refer to the surface? Well, we don't know, right? It could mean the stitching, right? It could be the overstitching, or it could be the fabric. But what we have right now, if we use a pronoun, either its surface, their surface, or the surface of it, which is no different from A and C are exactly the same, we don't know what that pronoun refers to. So even though those are all shorter than B, in the context, we need to have of the fabric in order to clarify what our noun actually is, because otherwise it is very unclear whether we're talking about fabric, or we're talking about the technique, or we're talking about the stitching. So B is the only one that clarifies that ambiguous pronouns are something that the SAT and the ACT both love to test, right? So be very wary of questions like 47 as you move through these standardized tests. All right, so for a question like 48, I want to remind us that the most important place to look is in the explanations, not the yes versus the no's, but rather I want us looking in the explanations after it, all right? Additionally, I want us working backwards. I want us looking for what is wrong in those explanations rather than what is right. Okay, I want us being deductive in our reasoning. So, for example, C doesn't work because while this would make sense, right, the original word reinforces the idea that although pajnatab can be used for everyday wear, it should be saved for occasional set for special occasions. Is that what we want this to be the case, right? We don't want this to be the case because Peng Xiong, the artist here, does think flower cloth can be used every day, right? Does she think it should be saved for special occasions? Um, no, we don't see that as a claim anywhere, right? Um, Now, D, does this explanation hold up? That it's more specifically describing the type of clothing that she disapproves of? First off, does she really disapprove of this clothing? I feel like that's too extreme. And then secondly, is regular clothes very specific? No, right? What may be regular clothes for some of you, aka pajamas and other embarrassing things, no offense, are not regular clothes for me. And then my regular clothes, which might be embarrassing to you, are not going to be regular clothes for you. Okay, so specifically doesn't work, nor does this too extreme distractor work. Now B, while we have yes, that's good, right? Does she want this to be sold large scale on stores? No, she knows that these things are single, you know, craftsman-y things, right? They're not going to be mass produced. So even though yes is all good, this revision doesn't emphasize that she wants it to be large scale in stores. Uh, she doesn't necessarily want things large scale in stores either. So the explanation doesn't make any sense. Finally, why is A all good? It does create a clearer contrast because mass-produced clothing um, makes more sense than regular in terms of clarifying what we have here, right? Additionally, uh, Pajnatab is very handcrafted. You cannot mass produce it because it has such specific techniques as we read earlier in this passage. Um, so it is a very clear contrast. So A is perfect, 48. So 49 asks a very specific question stem. If you missed this, I worry you maybe did not read the question stem. You either chose something that you thought was shortest or something like that. But remember, this is not asking us to choose the least redundant or the shortest answer choice. It asks us which one most clearly and concisely indicates that she wants other people to wear and appreciate handcrafted clothing, right? Um, so why does D not make sense? Because she wants to inspire others. Inspire others for what? Right? To, be their true selves or something generic, or to wear flower cloth more commonly, or, what? We don't know what she's hoping to inspire others to do without the to do so there. So even though that's the shortest answer choice, it doesn't do what we request, which is to showcase that she wants people wearing appreciating, handcrafted clothing, right? Attempt that approach is more words than we need to say follow suit. And then finally, C makes the same issue as D, which it says, okay, well, yeah, she's inspiring other people, these in this case, rather than broadly others, it's people she knows. But to do what? We don't know what she would be inspiring them to do. So A is our best answer because it's the only one that says what she's hoping that they will do. To do so, meaning wearing flower cloth or handmade clothing every day or more commonly. All right. So if you missed 49, you probably thought, ooh, I'm just going to pick the shortest answer. I'm on the ACT. That's always the best answer choice. Often the time it is, but not in every instance. Be on the lookout for that. Don't let them trap you by you thinking there is a rule when there really isn't a rule for a question like this. All right, so question 50 asks us our final question here to connect to the final sentence and to build on the ideas presented in the paragraph. So our final sentence says, showing a new generation the joys of Paj Natab and beautiful handcrafted clothing. All right, so that means our correct answer choice has to deal something with people who are either, in the new generation. All right, so the only two that have any sort of reference to age, doing anything, are B and C, right? A and D, neither of them have any sort of connection to a new generation, right? So B has this important line, adults her age. So is Pang Jiang a member of a new generation or no? Well, when we look earlier in the passage, we see that she has made Pajnatab for the past several decades, right? So our concern with this is that um, adults her age, if she's been doing it for several decades, is not a new generation, right? How do we know that C is the new generation? Well, 9 young is put there among women in a formal apprenticeship. That shows, wow, she is doing Pajnatab with the younger generation, a generation younger than her, which in turn is likely to be safely inferred to be a new generation, much more safely a new generation than an answer choice like B. And with that, we are at the end of the English section of this test 495. We also have review videos for the reading, the math, and the science. So go ahead and seek those out. It's been a pleasure working through this for you all, and hopefully it was helpful.